Last weekend, Henry Crew broke the world record at 23 years old to become the youngest person to ride a motorcycle around the world solo, and I was lucky enough to join for the last leg of the ride with a few other folks between the south coast of England and the bike shed in London where he set off from just over a year ago. He completed the trip on what might seem like a surprising choice of bike, a Ducati Scrambler desert sled. Before we left from Laguna Performance Centre in Ashford, I got a chance to get a few shots of the bike, and here's what I found out about it. Although you might expect someone to ride around the world on a bigger, more reputed adventure bike like a BMW 1200 GS, the desert sled seems like a relatively sensible choice compared to some of the other options Henry considered. Harley-Davidson were originally slated to provide a bike for this trip, proposing to convert a Sportster into an off-road adventure bike. Unfortunately, that fell through, and offers of a bike came in from Norton and Royal Enfield before Henry managed to get the Scrambler loaned from Ducati. This particular bike is a former press bike, and it had just 2,000 miles on the clock before he left. It's pretty much stock, but there are a few subtle mods which have helped to take it around the globe. One of the reasons there aren't that many customizations to the desert sled is that Henry says he wanted to prove that you could do a round the world trip on pretty much any bike. But of course, a rear luggage rack was needed, as well as a fly screen fitted, and engine guards are essential to prevent any major damage from drops. There's also a Gerbing heated clothing system on board and an extra USB socket at the bars. Fixing your own punctures is an absolute necessity when undertaking a trip like this, and it's much easier to plug a tubeless tyre than it is to repair an inner tube. So partway through the trip, when an inner tube got totally shredded, Henry converted the existing tyres on the desert sled by fitting an O-ring sports bike valve, which he taped up with duct tape to get a seal before sealing it properly at a garage. On the inside of the rim, the spokes didn't have any tape to make them airtight, but it seemed to hold anyway. Henry actually says that he refused any offers of truing the wheels by adjusting the spokes throughout the entire trip in fear of any adjustments breaking their seal. They've held for approximately 40,000 miles, and at one point one of the tyres had 6 plugs in it and still held air. Saddlebags for this trip were provided by Malay London, and they were used to carry clothes, a sleeping bag, a tent, a puncture kit, heated clothing, and some straps which could be used to tie the bike down in a truck or van if there was ever a major problem. He also used a Velomaki backpack to store electricals like a laptop and camera so they could be easily carried off the bike and only non-valuables left on the bike. Henry said in an interview that he rarely locked the bike on a trip, and the only thing that was stolen was a baseball cap off the back of his bike in Iran. Now, I'm sure you'll have noticed from the images that there's a pair of fuel cans on either side of the bike, and they each hold about 7 litres, which combined will be enough to fill the tank on the desert sled. This helps to give enough range to make it between petrol stations in the more remote parts of the trip. One of these cans actually cracked in Australia, and that led to fuel spilling all over the bike and Henry's gear, and as a result it was just used to keep the bag from touching the exhaust for the rest of the trip. Ducati dealers supported Henry throughout the trip to keep him on the road. The bike's gone through 2 clutches, with Henry having to ride 2,000 miles through Kazakhstan without a fully operating clutch before he could get it replaced. The bike's also had its forks replaced because of a failed seal. It might seem excessive just to replace these parts entirely, but it was the quickest way to keep him going on the trip rather than waiting for parts and time to rebuild. One of the most surprising things that I learned when researching this video is that all Henry used to navigate on this trip was his phone and Google Maps, which helps to prove his idea that anyone can do a trip like this with minimal equipment. Henry got by with downloading Google Maps data when possible, using a local SIM card for mobile data when he could, and failing both of those using an app called Maps.me as a fallback, which operates without any data at all. A USB cable was run from under the seat, under the tank to the bars to keep his phone alive. Henry had a few major checkpoints in mind, most importantly 2 opposing points on the globe in Malaysia and Chile, which are required to break the world record. The rest of the time he just made up the route a few days in advance. Anyway, that's all I've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning a bit more about this inspiring trip. I'll link to Henry's fundraising page in the description below, as he was raising money for the Movember Foundation throughout the journey, and they do some great work around men's mental health and cancer. I'll also link to a great hour-long interview by Eric van der Steeg, from which I got a lot of the information for this video, so it's worth checking out if you want more detail. Let me know if you got any questions in the comments below, and if it's your first time here, I do hope you hit subscribe, and then I'll see you in the next video.